عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين أما بعد. This is inshallah our final session in the book of Zakat from Fiqh al-Ibadat with Shaykh Muhammad al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah. And we have established what is Zakat, the definition of Zakat, upon whom Zakat is obligatory, from the hikam and the reasons as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated zakat. 4 categories on what zakat is due. In our final session today, inshallah, the session before that, we looked at those who receive the zakat. And in our final session today, we're looking at a number of masail which are from the branches from the masail when it comes to zakat. But these questions are frequently asked, so they are very important. The 4 or 5 things that we mentioned just a second ago, those are probably the most important things that a person needs to understand when it comes to zakat. What is it? What's the ruling on it? What's the evidences for that? What are from the hikam? What are the objectives of giving in zakat? What is zakat due on, the 4 categories that we looked at, and whom zakat is paid to. When a person understands that, then they've got a very good understanding of the basics of zakat. Today, though, inshallah, the Sheikh has a number of questions that have been left unanswered, so we're going to be looking at, inshallah, for the remaining of today's lesson and the remaining of the book, and inshallah, from the next session from the beginning, Kitab al-Siyam. The first thing then is, what is the ruling on the zakat, or what is the ruling on the wealth upon those people who are not mukallaf? We said from the conditions of zakat is that the person must be Muslim, sane, able, have possession of it, nisab, hawl, and the other conditions that we mentioned. So now, what happens if a person has some wealth, but they are not mukallaf? الزكاة في المال الصغير والمجنون, meaning the person is not accountable. That's what I mean by mukallaf. So a child has a lot of money, and what I mean by a lot of money is above the nisab. Or a person is, not with it when it comes to their sanity. It could be because of old age, it could be because of mental health. What happens to that person's wealth? The Shaykh answers, هذا فيه خلاف بين العلماء. In this issue, there is a difference of opinion between the scholars. Some of them have said that the zakat of the child is not, or the person who is not mukallaf, should we say, the person who is not mukallaf, there's no zakat on them, because the pen is lifted. غير واجب ناظرا إلى تغليب التكلف بها, based on the ability that they have. Meaning, if the person is slightly insane, I mean, I don't know if that's the right word of me mentally, but I think you get the idea that if the person is sometimes has their aql about them and sometimes not, then we have to inspect. Some of the ulama have said there is no zakat on it, but if they are sometimes with it, then now they are accountable. That's one view. ومنهم من قال, and from the ulama, and the second scholarly opinion is that they have said بل الزكاة واجبة في مالهما, rather zakat is wajib upon their wealth. Why? Because this is from the haqq of the fuqara. This is the right of the 8 categories. This becomes their wealth, as we see from the hadith of Mu'adh bin Jabal here, when the Messenger of Allah ﷺ sent him to Yemen. He said, تُؤْخَذْ مِنْ أَغْنِيَاهِمْ فَتُرَدُّ, meaning it is returned to the fuqara. So it is their wealth. Also, we have the ayah in Surah Tawbah here, 103, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ, take it from their wealth. So zakat is due, and it is then now an obligation upon someone to make sure, and normally it's the wali, meaning the father or the parent, to make sure that the zakat has been paid on it. And if they don't, then they are the ones that are sinful. They are the ones that are sinful if there is negligence in them. But the zakat is due on the wealth of those people who are not mukallaf. Right, another mas'ala, and a very important mas'ala as well. So that's an important one, because a lot of people would probably not pay attention to that because they would think, okay, my children, but they're only little and they've got money, but they're only little, they've got savings, maybe £300, £400. But they're little. Why should we give zakat? It's their money, it's their wealth, let them save it. So, if it meets the criterion, then this becomes the right of the fuqara. Here we have another mas'ala and this again, something which is commonly asked, and this is happening in the Muslim community, but we have to understand it. Can you give zakat to relatives? And the Sheikh says, yes, you can, based on 3 conditions. Number 1, that these people are deserving of the zakat. In Ahl zakat, he says here. Number 2, that you are not responsible to spend over them. So you can't say, for example, let me just write this down. Number 1, they are eligible. Number 2, you don't have responsibility over them. Because this responsibility is wajib anyway. So you can't say, for example, I will give my wife zakat, or I'll give my children zakat, or I'll give my parents zakat. And then number 3, that there is no inheritance, meaning you can't give somebody zakat and then have it inherited if they were to pass away. Because then that obligatory spending would then be returned back to you. And as we know then, the person hasn't departed with his wealth in this way. If these conditions have been met, the Sheikh then says, actually giving zakat to relatives is probably the best forms of giving a zakat, and they're the people who have the most priority. Not only because they are poor and they are needy, but also you are sealing the ties of kinship. And you are being good and kind to those people who are closest to you and have most rights over you. So the ruling here then, so the question is, can you give zakat to relatives? The answer is yes, subject to these conditions. And if a person wants to then have to give them the zakat, then this actually becomes something which is really favorable for that person. And that person will get, inshallah, even more rewarded. But then here, the Sheikh adds a qaida, where he says, وَقَاعِدَةٌ لِذَلِكَ أن الأقارب إذا أعطاهم الإنسان زكاة ماله لدفع حاجتهم وهم ممن يجب عليه نفقتهم فإن ذلك لا يصح. This is the qaida. I mean, I don't think we need to repeat that, but this is the qaida that he is saying here. And the qaida here, basically, the principle here is, if you've got something which is obligatory and you've got another thing which is obligatory, you can't combine the 2 obligations. They are 2 separate obligations. So then spending and maintenance would be one obligation, the zakat would be a second one. And then the final mas'ala, and again, a very important one, a frequently asked one, which is zakat when it's in relation to debts. If a person is in debt, do they receive zakat? Do they give zakat? And can you forgive people and overlook the debt and then include it as zakat? So there are 3 separate masail. And the next question, actually, just going back a minute, the Sheikh has asked the question, which is similar to the previous one. So the Sheikh says, for example, or the question is saying, for example, Sheikh, can I give zakat to my mother or my father? And the question is asking something which is really important as an added piece of information. فيما لا يجب الإنسان, because sometimes it is wajib to spend on your parents and sometimes it isn't. It will become wajib if they have a need and you have surplus. Meaning if they are in need, they are poor, and you have your own incomings, but that's only enough for you to support yourself and your family, then it's not wajib for you to spend on your parents. But if you've got a surplus and they are in need, then it becomes wajib. If you've got a surplus and they are not in need, then it's again not wajib. But then also connected to the debt issue is that if they've got something of debts, that it is not wajib for you to spend on them because this is a debt on their head, on their own head. It's not anything to do with maintenance. However, like we've said a second ago, which is that then say they've got a debt and they are not able to fulfill that debt. Can you give relatives, your parents, your children, whoever else it may be, zakat if they fulfill the criterion? Then yes, like we have said, this becomes from the best of deeds. So the next mas'ala then, before we get into debts actually, this mas'ala I think should probably be the last thing. Let's understand what is the ruling on debts. Number one, if a person is in debt and he has the minimum nisab, he fulfills the criteria. Minimum nisab, he's had it for the whole, he's got possession of it, etc. Then he needs to give zakat on it. Irrespective of whether he's got a big debt or a small debt, that's the wealth that he has in his hands. That's the first thing. The second thing, what if he owes a debt? So that's the first one actually. He owes the debt, but he's got enough. What if he's due a debt? So he's lent someone some money and he hasn't got that money returned back to him. In that, there are two scenarios. The first scenario is if he has access to that wealth. So person A lends person B some money. Person B is able to pay back person A. But person A says, actually, you can hold on to it. It's fine. You can pay me back later. So now person B is able to pay back the money. So that wealth then is connected to person A's money. But if person B is not able to pay that person back, then it's not included in his wealth. So in the first scenario, like we have said before, the conditions of giving a zakat is that he has possession of it. If he's got access to that wealth, then he is then deemed as being as those who have possession of that wealth. But if he doesn't have it, the person is slow in paying back, or he's paying back some drips and drabs, then there is no zakat on it. Unless if it meets the remaining conditions. So that's one. So that's two now from the Messiah. Number one, he owes a debt. Number two, he is due a debt. Number three from the Messiah, hukm, isqat al-dayn and al-madeen. Can you forego and overlook a loan or a debt and then say, well, I'll include this as part of zakat? And the Sheikh says, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah also mentions, this is not valid. And this is for a number of reasons. Number one, when you lent them the money, there was no intention of zakat. Number two, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ. So that khudh means that you must make then an ikhraj. The person actually makes a payment of zakat. There is no evidence for a person to say, well, I'll forego a debt and include that as part of the zakat. Also, from the hadith of Mu'adh, تُؤْخَذْ مِنْ أَغْنِيَائِهِمْ is taken. So zakat, number one, you need to have the intention before you actually make the payment. You can't make the payment and then say afterwards, oh, I intend zakat or sadaqah. And number two, the payment, the donation has to be made. Number three, the Sheikh says, when a person foregoes a debt, it is as if sometimes فَكَأَنَّمَا أَخْرَجَ الرَّدِيء عَنِ الطَّيِّبِ. Sometimes the person is just like saying, okay, I'll forego what is not important to me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention of it, as you can see at the bottom of the screen here. وَلَا تَيَمُّمُ الْخَبِيثَ مِنْهُ تُنْفِقُونَ وَلَسْتُمْ بِآخِذِي إِلَّا أَن تُغْمِضُوا فِيهِ. Meaning that ayah 267 from Baqarah is that don't give zakat from the worst of your wealth and say, you know, you can just have the crumbs. You can have the worst of my wealth. So foregoing a debt could have that in the very nature of that payment or of that interaction. And then it doesn't befit that we include that part of zakat. And then the fourth sort of perspective that the Sheikh gives, لأن قيمة الدين في النفس ليست كقيمة العين. I mean, I suppose this is connected to the point that he's just made. I'll include it as a separate fourth one. قيمة الدين في النفس ليست كقيمة العين, meaning when you are making the إخراج. So say, for example, your zakat is £500. When you are making this payment of that, you are actually parting with it. You are actually making a donation. You are actually, preferring the akhirah, and you're preferring the poor and the needy over the life of the dunya and yourself and your own nafs and your own desires. This is not the same as you foregoing adah. Therefore, I mean, overlooking and foregoing is a great deed in itself, but can it be included as part of zakat? The answer is no. And then connected to debts as well. So now this is our fourth masala when it comes to debts, which is, can the person who is in debt receive the zakat? And we did this last week actually, which is that the people who are in debt receive the zakat. However, this is on the condition that the person doesn't have enough to fulfill the payments himself. Meaning, if the person has an income of 1,000 and his expenses are 1,000, how would he ever pay off his debt? So we will help him with that, with the wealth of zakat, on the condition that his debt is not connected to something which is haram, or, as some of the ulama have mentioned, even if it's connected to something haram, as long as he's made tawbah. What about then the scenario where a person has an income of 11 and he spends 1,000? So he's got 100 surplus, and then he's got a debt. So the Shafi'iyya have said, look, if his debt is high and it is feared that it's going to take him a very long time to pay it off, and this for me seems to be the strongest from the two views, is that you can give him zakat. But if he, for example, is able to pay it off even slowly, then no, okay, we won't give him the zakat in that scenario. So the people who receive it are those people, and there is no difference of opinion, are those people who are struggling and they can't pay off the debt. What about if a person is able to pay it off very, very slowly? Then in that scenario, we inspect. And if he's got a huge debt and he's got a little bit which is surplus, which will not help him cover the debt except for a long period of time, then we will say that that person is eligible to receive it. Question, I'm not sure how relevant this question is, but the question is here nonetheless. Is it permissible to give zakat to the poor who is not able to fulfill his debt on the condition that it is then returned back to the person who gave the debt? And the Sheikh says that is not permissible. يعني لو كان عندك مدين فقير. Say for example you've got a person who is poor and he is in debt. If you give him the zakat, there's no harm in it. If you pay the creditor directly, there is no harm in that. But the question is asking here, if there is a way that you would end up benefiting by giving that person the zakat, in one way or another it's returned back to you, one way or another there's a benefit, and the Sheikh says then that is not permissible. And that brings us to the end of Kitab al-Zakat. Here we've got Hukm al-Zakat for Islam, which we covered in the beginning. So I don't think there's a need for us to repeat. But what we have said previously, we can quickly summarize this bit as well, which is that Zakat is one of the pillars of Islam, and it is wajib, and it becomes a fard al-ain for those people who fulfill the conditions. And some of the ulama have even said that if a person was to be negligent on that, then that person could leave the fold of Islam. The Sheikh has said, no, it seems to be more correct that the person who leaves off paying zakat out of weakness and negligence, he is not a kafir. But if a person was to deny it, then that person has denied one of the obligatory parts of Islam, one of the pillars, and that would take a separate ruling. And then the Shaykh concludes by saying, فَعَلَى الْمَرْءِ الْمُسْلِمِ, that is upon the Muslim, أَن يَشْكُرَ اللَّهَ عَلَى نِعْمَتِهِ عَلَيْهِ بِالْمَالِ. And this is the way that the person is now being thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the many favors that He has granted him. Not just savings, but all the favors, the food, the drink, the clothing, the housing, the security. The zakat is one of those ways that a person, like we have said before, he is parting with his wealth and doing an act of worship which he wouldn't normally do. So this is now a branch of Islam or a pillar of Islam where a person is doing something financially. And as we've said before, each one of these pillars are unique in each of their ways. So the Shahadatain is something which happens internally and externally. The Salah is something which happens internally and externally, but also bodily. Shahadatain is internally and on statement. But the Salah will have all three. Internally, on statement, on your limbs. But now we've got zakat. This is internal, but also financial. And we've got siyam, we've got internal as well as abstaining. And then the hajj has all four of the above. So now the Shaykh is saying here, it's upon the Muslim to understand that when a person is given the zakat, he is doing an act of worship, which is unlike any other act of worship because he is parting with his wealth. But also he is then choosing the akhirah. And this is what makes him sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he does that, then he is being thankful to him subhanahu for all of the favors that he has granted him. But then, as we have said, and like I said, we don't need to repeat too much, but then that creates a great deal of benefits which he will benefit not only in his religion, but it purify him, it purifies his wealth, purifies his family, but also it brings about unity and cooperation and brotherhood because it creates love and bonds. It creates the ability to bring about growth and strength until the many other wisdoms that we previously mentioned anyway. حتى يزيد الله في ماله بركة ونماء. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make such people blessed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes us of those who hear and follow in the best possible way. Allahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala Muhammad.